if it wasn't for Eusebius writing his quotes within his books, it would have been lost to history forever. So in that aspect, he actually saved that part of Phoenician history. So
Hmm.
that's
I heard the
one
name
thing.
before. Centurion A. What does he do? Your
Now, Sanitara Nathion was a writer
this name was
before um,
Fifty.
the whole
Centurion A.
thing with
Clerical
Eusebius and
family.
everything.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay. Well, can you? Okay, I
he
apologize for interrupting.
was
What were you saying?
basically the guy that he wanted to. He took quotes from him because he was a pagan.
No, Baba, I have that. That's not the part. I like to know who he is and what he does.
Well, basically, Sennacherib was, well, first of all, he's a free man, and he
Yeah.
was a Phoenician
What he
historian. He
does.
was also a writer. He would write about the truth whenever he found it, and he would always search for stories of the past. So he was basically one of the first historians in history
History.
back when we call our history ancient history, you know. So he was like one of the beginning, the first ones to do it. It was a different time back then. Like homosexuality wasn't even a word back then. It wasn't even termed that way.
It was just because like love was the like is yeah, it wasn't really considered homosexuality. It was just sexuality.
You got to a lot of cultures back then and civilizations didn't even, you know, it wasn't even a issue, and a lot of them actually practiced it.
Yeah, like, but it's crazy because only in certain cultures, like certain cultures, it was normalized, and other cultures, it was not even a thought type of thing. So it's just interesting to listen to and absorb again. But okay, I'm going to mute for a second, but I'm listening. Okay, I'll be right back.
Well, you know, a good example of what I'm trying to say is like back in when they came out with the Iliads, okay, what we read in school was very watered down, all right. But if you read the original text, you would find out that there was a lot of things in there that was not very good. There was it had homosexuality in it, a lot of homosexuality, and it also referred to men, grown men, having sex with boys. No, I'm talking about back then during that time period. Today it's unacceptable, but back then it was everywhere. It was acceptable according to a lot of civilizations. They practiced it, and I mean a lot of civilizations.
Having sex with children, we're talking about, or homosexual? That's what 315. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, and that's what I'm saying.
Now, being honest, I can't really say either of the two are different according to that time period. I really don't believe they saw it as something that was different. It wasn't. It was just something that was normal to them that they did. You know, there has always been homosexuality and pedophilia since the beginning of civilization, cultures, um, and there's evidence written in the literature all over the place, not in one culture, but quite a few of them. So with that, I mean, I personally don't feel like it's an epidemic that just recently started. You know what I'm saying? It's been around. As a matter of fact, it's less prevalent now than what it used to be, in my opinion, because of the literature. I've mentioned the Iliads, and that's just one of many. Now, what I have noticed is that it's become more of an issue today than what it was back then. Okay, people don't or people back then didn't really make an issue out of homosexuality. It was just they made references to it, but the word homosexuality was never really coined. Another thing too, like I see a lot of people who have this idea that like we came from this golden age, you know, and it's farthest from the truth. Everything that I've read that concerns history shows that humans have come from a very brutal past. There was never any kind of golden age. If you
Yeah,
want a good example, you
I
know,
just
you
wanna
just look
see
at
how many
the
cultures, like, yeah.
Assyrians, the ancient Assyrians. They were very brutal. Um, they, the uh, Greeks, okay, the Greeks, for example, would take and murder their children if they were born deformed or with any problems. But then after that, they would turn around and make criticisms towards the Phoenicians, saying that they sacrificed their babies to their gods. You know what I'm saying? So in their mind, it was okay to kill your baby if your baby was deformed, but sacrificing them for your god, that was a totally different thing. And it was always like that. It's crazy how all the mentality back then was. You know what I'm saying? Now, when I was talking about brutality in that time period, the Assyrians is a real good example of what I was referring to. There is documented amounts of tablets that's been collected from the Assyrians, and within those tablets, you can hear about how brutal they were towards their women. I mean, some of the stuff that they did just towards their women is completely mind blowing. So that is one good example of the brutality that took place back then. And that's not even mentioning what they did to their enemies. You know, they would take the skin off their enemies and put it on the walls of Nineveh. Before the Arab invasion, the majority of people in that region was either Arab, or no, they were Aryan, or they were Semitic.
Everything came from Africa. Like the land literally was split off. It was the same people to the extent of which, like I said, from I'm talking about way beyond there being um, cultures defined and different type of quote unquote races. Just as the people, it's that being the center. That's why they call it the heart. And then it breaks off. So based off of where your location is and just what season it is going to determine the type of skin complexion that you have. This is something that we often forget as well, because you can be very light skinned, but very by, I guess, denomination or nationality, African American or African or of African descent. But that technically is true for almost everyone, actually everyone, because if it, that I mean that's actually a human. We're going to just be fair about it. And when you do that type of we look at it like that, at least from that extent, is the same culture, or not the same culture, but like we are all the same people, and we just got spread out, and we kind of walk over that part of the story. Or am I incorrect? Where was that not?
Now, granted, you're right about that when it comes to environment. Environment over time can affect the color of your skin and
I
stuff
can
like
hear
that.
you.
But you know, there's more important things to understand too when it comes to history. Like DNA is one of the newer things that's coming into play. But then there's also linguistics as well as archaeology. So there's a lot of different factors that are taking place there that has to be understood. And you know, a lot of people have an issue with racism these days, and that right there by itself causes a lot of problems in archaeology and history and being historians, because that's something that has to be calculated when determining, you know, what the history of man is.
How
So
do you understand what's true or what's not true, and what makes it to where
The thing that is most important is hard data. Okay. Now you got to understand we come from a uh, we come from a lot of lore. Our history is full of lore, and it goes all the way back, myths and lore, and things that just aren't true. Okay, and it's in our writings all over the place. And for a historian and an archaeologist and all of these people who do the research, they have to go through all that stuff and they have to come up with the hard data and try to understand what's true and what's not true when it comes to that.
I feel, and you're saying that race is important in regards to knowing the truth about it, and
Not racism. Not. That's not what I'm saying.
oh, I was just going to ask you a question. I was just using that as the lead-in because so you know what I'm referring to. So when you're saying like race is important, and then it's something for you to be able to know, I just would like to wonder or ask you: do you feel as though you'd not be able to learn the same amount of history without being able to equate it to race, or?
Yeah, basically what I'm saying is like races and cultures generally do the same thing, and they have.
Do the same things?
No, technically I'm saying that races and cultures generally do the same thing.
Right. Regardless of race, right? Regardless of race, it'll be different races doing the same thing, right?
No, actually, in some cases, yeah. Uh, Regardless of race, because some cultures had different races in them. But generally, they kind of go hand in hand when it comes to what I'm talking about. This has to do more with the behaviors and what people did and the differences in each culture and recognizing those differences so that they could identify these different cultures so that they could understand like where they were located and where they came from. And that had to do with linguistics and archaeology as well, you know. Okay, so let me try to break this down a little bit better, okay? Through textiles, for example. Textiles and migration patterns and DNA and archaeological finds are what is important here. And you know, you keep mentioning differences and differences. Yeah, there's differences that are being researched, but you got to understand that because of these differences, it actually does, you know, kind of show freaking the similarities as well. They need to do this in order to, you know, find out what the migration patterns are of certain civilizations so that they can
Oh, so they
figure out
started somewhere
where
else
they're
and they moved.
coming
That's what
from.
migration is, right? When
So,
they start, yeah. Okay.
yeah, it's when cultures and travel, you know, from one place to another. And when I refer to textiles, I'm talking about like blankets, okay, and the patterns that are put into it. So, whenever one culture creates a certain blanket in a certain style, what they can do is they can remember that style and they can go to another culture and
Mm.
remember that style as well. And after they've done the research and they know the patterns of those blankets, then they can say this cloth was made from this culture.